This podcast is brought to you by North Carolina's electric cooperatives.
This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Thank you for watching the Easter edition of NC Spin. The biggest task of state government is education. We spend 57 cents of every tax dollar on educating our people. This week, we're going to talk about several education issues being proposed to our legislature and get our panel's take on them. We're also going to provide a quick preview for the special congressional elections that are going to be held in just a few weeks. And as always, we ask our panel to tell us something we don't know. Speaking of our panel, they include the grandest lady in our Easter parade, Becki Gray with the John Locke Foundation, John Hood, syndicated columnist and author, Chris Fitzsimon, director of the Newsroom, and Howard Lee, former state senator and former cabinet official and chairman of the State Board of Education, and we could go on and on. We'll begin our uninterrupted debate after these brief messages from our underwriters.
Partners for Innovation in Healthcare. We're supporting common sense solutions for North Carolina's healthcare delivery system, promoting access, affordability, quality care, and innovation. Visit us on the web at pihc.info.
From treating the newest member of your family to helping a loved one make end-of-life decisions, your family physician is with you every step, for every stage of life, for every member of your family. Despite a healthcare landscape fraught with potential landmines, family physicians across North Carolina are providing you a lifetime of committed, dependable medical care. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
Life's busy, but you're in control. As an electric cooperative member, you have access to lots of tools to help manage your home energy use and budget, so you can focus on what's most important.
More than 2 million North Carolinians, including 435,000 children, live in areas where they can't buy healthy food. We can do better than this. Learn how we can improve access to healthy food at ncallianceforhealth.org.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
Let's get to it. North Carolina spends 57 cents of every tax dollar we receive on education. We all agree that educating our people is a top priority. But that agreement starts breaking down when it comes to where and how these dollars are spent. This legislative session's only 2 months old, and there are a host of education topics before the session. Many of them deal with our teachers. Howard Lee, average teacher pay in North Carolina now exceeds $50,000 a year, well above the median income in our state. But we're facing a teacher shortage. Why aren't more people choosing to be teachers?
Tom, I actually want to commend the legislature for the progress it's made in increasing teacher salaries. And certainly I think that's important, but that's not the only factor that contribute to both recruitment and retention of teachers. The environment in which teachers are required to work, especially classroom disruptions and discipline, contributes to that. More importantly, I think the key person in our schools has to be a principal who both goes out and recruits people to come and work with him or her, and then be able to support them in a way that it makes them feel they're valuable both and they have the support of the administration. So if we can correct some of those factors, I think we would be a long ways toward getting teachers both to come into the classroom and stay in the classroom.
Becki, the legislature is considering a proposal that would allow retired teachers to actually come back in. Now, they wouldn't get full current teacher pay. They would get some reductions in teacher pay, but they wouldn't lose any of their retirement benefits, so-called double dipping. What do you think of the idea?
I think that's a great idea. I think these ways to get more teachers, certainly experienced teachers, back in the classroom, into the classroom is a great idea. I think that we should seriously look at that. I think we should also look at recruiting teachers and accepting training of trained teachers from other states rather than making them come back and get at the very end of the line for certification and those kind of things. You know, there's a lot of options to get good teachers and to retain the teachers that we have. And I think it's paying attention to a lot of things General Assembly's looking at. Testing is another whole issue.
Chris, so far as it goes, the State Board of Education recently said they weren't just automatically going to accept transfers of teachers from other states. The Senate made a proposal this past week that would make it easier, because they said the result of what's going on is we're paying substitutes, people who aren't necessarily qualified, in the classroom. What do you think of the idea?
Well, I think unless we know, the question is what sort of training and certification and licensure do other states have? I don't think we can do it on a blanket basis. I think there's some middle ground. I do think one of the things we didn't mention yet, we mentioned before on the show, that new teachers no longer have access to the state health plan when they retire. So we're taking away a little bit of incentives at the same time we're increasing pay and doing other things.
So that might incentivize people to go into the teaching profession.
Well, right. I mean, I think it's less likely you'll choose it as a career if they're taking a significant benefit away when you start.
John, I know you've been in favor of school choice and have been a supporter of charter schools. Charter schools have a provision that only 50% of their teachers have to be licensed teachers. Should we extend this to the public schools, to traditional schools?
I think that the evidence about licensure is mixed. It's more mixed than it is for things that I'm more insistent about, like the master's degree supplement stuff. There's just very little evidence that that's worth paying. But with licensure, I think that it would be reasonable to allow public schools to have more flexibility in some areas than others. We shouldn't assume that licensure necessarily equates with being a good teacher, but we should also not assume that it is easy to determine who's going to be a good teacher if that's not their profession and they're making a mid-course correction. We do have some problems sometimes with alternative certification. As much as I like the notion, sometimes it goes awry.
Howard, I want to move over to the area of this teacher rally that's being proposed for May 1st. We're seeing school systems, most all the large school systems across the state have already declared that on May 1st they're going to be closed. What do you think about that? That's what happened last year. Was it effective? Did it work?
Last year, I thought the rally made some sense because the idea was to call attention to teacher needs and the fact that teachers are demanding more attention to their pay and so forth. I'm not in favor this year because I think it's important to have teachers in the classroom, but I also think it's important to put the pressure on the legislature to continue to do what needs to be done in order to pay teachers salaries and to keep the good work they've done at this point.
State Superintendent Mark Johnson says, no, I think that it ought to be moved to June 1st. Well, most schools, a lot of schools would be out by then, would they not?
Well, most schools would be out by then, but I'm not a great fan of protest anymore as for protest's sake. I think there has to be a lot more work that goes on to achieve the outcomes that people claim they're interested in.
Chris, let's look at some of the things that the teachers at this rally, primarily supported by NCAE, say they want to try to accomplish. They want a $15 minimum wage for all school personnel. Or 5%, whichever.
Well, the General Assembly last year had increased all state employees, but they didn't increase, they had a floor for all state employees, what they termed was a living wage. I don't know why we can't do it for all personnel. They were left out of that. I think that's a reasonable request.
And 5% pay increase for the teachers again this year,
think that,
5% for retirees?
You know, the thing about teacher pay, which I always find fascinating, we measure it in a lot of different ways, and we should measure it a lot of different ways, but then everybody will say the most important person to a child's education is the teacher. So I think they should be among I think we should continue to raise their pay to continue to recruit better people into the classroom.
Becki, they're also saying that they want to ensure that there are sufficient librarians, psychologists, social workers, counselors, nurses, in all of our schools, coupled together with Medicaid expansion for student health, reinstating the state health benefits. Are they making requests here that the legislature might embrace? Or?
Well, a lot of these things the legislature has already embraced. Last year's rally, it was interesting to me, last year's rally, they came to rally to demand higher pay. Well, the General Assembly already had a pay increase in the budget before they even came. So a lot of these things the General Assembly is considering. One of the things, again, how do you get more librarians? How do you get school counselors, school psychologists, those kind of things? One way to do it is to have reciprocity with licensing in other states so that as people move to North Carolina, that would encourage somebody to come here.
Though. School nurses is a funding issue. We don't have a short, those things are funding, whether or not you give the school systems money to pay for.
Well, and the General Assembly is looking at that. We've seen bills that address these very things. There are compacts about increasing licensing within the southeastern part of the state, and also funding it. We're still working through the budget, but these are things that the General Assembly is considering.
John, let's put this stool down on its real legs here. Part of the problem with all of this.
What an analogy. I'm waiting for your question here.
Part of the problems with all of this is that the legislature just has a real prejudice against NCAE, and NCAE, of course, is backing this. What's the problem there?
May I have enough time to list them?
You have 15 seconds.
Well, I'll just say quickly about this rally. It is obviously a partisan political stunt. It's not anything other than that. They even admit that it was about trying to change the composition of the legislature partisan-wise. It is creepy that they decided to hold a rally on May 1st and to use a communist symbol off of a Soviet flag. That's creepy, and it's going to annoy people in the legislature, and it ought to, and people around the state, and it ought to. And finally, of course they could have this, if it's just a rally for the teachers to express themselves, of course they could do it in June, and therefore not inconvenience all of these families all across the state that they don't have any arrangements for this date. This was a foolish decision on their part. I know they think it's politically brilliant, but at the very least, they could have come up with something more creative than basically taking an image off a Soviet flag and flipping it around.
I hear you saying that you think this could backfire on them.
I think it will backfire on them in a way that it did not last year, as Howard's point is correct.
Howard, all of us want accountability for what goes on in educating our students, but the legislature is considering eliminating a number of the state-mandated exams and reducing to the local school systems the number of tests that are required. Is that going to affect accountability?
Well, having been a part of creating many of those exams and the accountability system, I certainly think it could stand a review at this point and determine if everything that we were doing at that time continues to be relevant. I don't think it necessarily cuts down on accountability. I still think what we've got to do is to recognize that it is the administration closest to the school that ends up holding the school accountable for outcomes. And that's the principal. We have not given principals the flexibility and the authority to run that school in a way that he or she can ensure that students are learning.
This is a tune that you've been singing quite some time now. For years, we always were talking about teachers, 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 teachers. You're saying principals, principals, principals.
To me, that is the key person for success of any school and the most important person in that school. And of course, because of that, that principal can bring in the kind of teachers and prevent the turnover that I'm experiencing in some of the schools with which I'm working now.
Becki, the Senate has a proposal now to allow the state superintendent of public instruction to approve bonds for charter schools to improve their facilities. Now, these bonds would be tax-exempt bonds. Our state constitution says that whenever you are using, essentially, the public borrowing capacity, the voters have to vote on it. What do you think of this idea with the superintendent being able to, I mean, should it be the treasurer? Should it be the governor? Should it be somebody else?
Well, as I understand it now, some of the county commissions can do that it's more of a local thing and that there have been some problems with that. So this is an effort to streamline that process and allow those charter schools to be built and up and running in a quicker amount of time.
Yeah, so far as it goes, talking of bonds, we haven't heard a whole lot about the school construction bonds lately. The House's proposal is voted $2 billion in bonds. The Senate says, let's do a pay-as-you-go $1.9 billion. We have any idea where all that stands, Chris?
No, I think it's all going to get, it'll be one of the issues that will be lingering at the end of the session. It'll be tied up in the budget debate, I think. I think this will be one of those issues that won't be resolved until the session is over. And by the way, I think it would be not a good idea to let the school superintendent approve bonds. But
let's get to the issue about the legislature's considering, John, to give teachers $400 to be able to purchase school supplies. A lot of teachers take money out of their own pockets to be able to buy bulletin board stuff and supplies for their kids. But there's been some real pushback about this provision, primarily because the $400 isn't coming from the state. It's going to come out of the funds that the local education units receive.
Well, it's a bit of a complex issue because the supporters of the proposal say, yes, it would come out of the money we're already sending, but the public school districts are not using the money for the supplies as intended. They're redirecting the funds somewhere else. But the flip side of that would be that if you buy some kind of supplies in bulk, you presumably get a better deal than if teachers are doing it individually. On the other hand, you could negotiate it so the teachers have access to a bulk buying privilege, even though they're individually making choices that fit their classroom. I think this is worth some additional thought and consideration. Even if you don't increase the funding amount, it's possible you'd spend the money more effectively if you do it creatively.
Motivation.
By the way, it's worth noting that the funding for school supplies is significantly lower than it was just 5-10 years ago. I mean, this does not add any new money.
And I think that is certainly the case, that it's lower than it has been if you adjust for inflation. I don't think these two things are necessarily in tension. You could have as a goal increasing the overall amount of money going into that spigot, but also change the way it's distributed or give our teachers a little more flexibility.
Becki, another provision that's being talked about in the legislature is the way that we assign grades to the individual schools. There have been 3 proposals for this. One would reestablish a formula or establish a formula. 50% of the grade comes from test scores, 50% comes from student growth during the year. One would allow a 15-point scale, which was established last year, to become permanent. There are different ways of doing this. What do you think about these concepts for how we go about grading our schools?
Well, what we've learned is if you put a grading system or a ranking system in place, it's going to start a firestorm. I mean, we've seen that, applied all different kinds of ways. When we put the grading system in place, there was an effort for accountability, and so that parents and administrators and funders and everybody else could identify where the schools were really succeeding, where they were doing okay, and where the real trouble places were, that, we could address those. That was the intent of all of this. Then it comes in, as always, the devil's in the detail, and how do you make that accountable? And there's been a lot of concern, and I think that it's absolutely legitimate that, should a school that's in a very affluent area with a lot of parental involvement and all, should they be graded under the same criteria as a school that perhaps has real challenges, low income, again, challenges, that school is making progress but not what the other schools. So how do you make all these things equal?
So I think I hear you saying you favor some sort of a combination of using growth.
Absolutely, yes. I think growth has to be part of it.
And the House, it's worth noting, has passed legislation to change it. They've put it in the budget to change it. This is entirely the Senate leadership who has refused to change it.
And there are basically 2 options there. One of them is the current ratio is 80% score, 20% growth. One idea is to just make it 50-50, and the other idea is to issue the 2 grades separately. I mean, the 2 grades separately is probably a more logical idea, but it is more confusing.
Howard, I want to move over very quickly. Read to Achieve. We got some very disappointing results from Read to Achieve scores. The Senate is considering revamping it. This has been Phil Berger's pet project over in the Senate. Any idea whether the new concepts of Read to Achieve are going to end up being any better?
Well, I certainly think Phil should be commended for having taken the leadership in trying to bring this about. But unless and until we can actually have the personnel on the ground to help kids learn how to read, the money is not going to make a hill of beans of difference. I'm spending time in elementary schools raising money and providing money for the principal to go out and buy books for kids who don't have books in their home, and then rewarding them for
reading
their
books.
achievements. And it's worked in one school. It hadn't worked as well in the middle schools. But we've got to stop believing that we can embarrass people into excellence, and we're just not going to do that.
I need to write that down. I want to switch gears on us here. Spring is in the air, and most people are thinking about getting outside, but in just a few weeks, voters in 24 counties are going to be asked to choose contestants for 2 special congressional elections. Voters in the eastern part of the state are going to vote on nominees for the seat long held by Congressman Walter Jones, while voters in a district, a weird-looking district that runs along our southern border, will vote for nominees for the 9th district. This remains open because of the absentee ballot scandal. Becki, with these special elections just a week away, in fact, early voting has already started in the 3rd district, there hasn't been a lot of buzz about them. Are people just not interested, or what's going on with them?
Well, Tom, at first I'd say, we're here in Raleigh and don't live in the 3rd district or the 9th district where this is. So maybe we're just removed. Maybe why we don't have a sense of the buzz is because we're not in the middle of it. So I called on some of my Facebook friends who lived in those districts to tell me what their sense of scientific polling, exactly. But what I'm hearing from those folks are people who are engaged with party politics, with their parties, who are regular, very engaged voters, are really interested in these races, but unaffiliated voters, or perhaps those voters who are not as engaged, are not. When you have 17 candidates to consider within within a primary, it's hard to sort through that. And then, what we have in the 9th is, some folks are just kind of disgusted with it.
Let's take on the 3rd, because Becky's onto something here. We've got 26 people running in this 3rd congressional district special election. The primary is to be April 30th. If there is a runoff, it'll be July 9th. So far as it goes, 17 Republicans, 6 Democrats, 2 Libertarians, a Constitution Party. Boy, this is just confusing. Can the voters sort all this stuff out, John?
Well, may I venture to say that once we get to a second primary, which I assume will happen, then there'll be 2 candidates in multiple parties, whichever ones have it, Democrat and Republican probably. And then I think it will be easier to focus public's attention on it. And that's also true for the 9th.
This is a Republican primary, a Republican district, has been for years and years and years. There are a bunch of Democrats who are running, however, in that. Some names there, former mayor of Greenville, Alan Thomas, Ernest Reeves, who's a perennial candidate from Greenville, lost to Walter Jones in 2016, Greg Hunter from Beulahville, Ike Johnson from Jacksonville, Dana Outlaw, who's the mayor of New Bern, and Richard Bew. Any front runners in this?
No, I mean, I think Alan Thomas is probably the best known in the region. He's the mayor of the largest city of those, or the most visible city anyway. And as I've said on the show before, unless something dramatically unusual happens with whoever the Republican nominee is, the Republican will probably win. The Democrats, I think, are running, hoping when the districts are redrawn, they'll have a name.
Any chance this 3rd district is going to avoid a runoff?
Seems
hard to imagine.
Well, because you have to get 30% of the vote in order to avoid a runoff, and that seems unlikely.
Of all the Republicans, you made a comment that it almost sounds like a church choir. Yeah. Any front runners there that just absolutely jump at you?
No one jumps out at me. I think it's a matter of who makes the best case in the primary.
Let's move over to the 9th district, because in that particular situation, the primary is May 14th. The general or runoff is September 10th, with the general in November 5th, if that's the case. Dan McCready is the only Democrat. Among the Republicans, Becki, any front runners there?
Well, it seems like we're hearing a lot from Dan Bishop and Matt Ridenhour, both from Mecklenburg County. The thing that's interesting in that is most of the population in that are in Mecklenburg and Union County, so that's where most of the activity is.
As far as it goes, Dan Bishop has gone on television. He's the first one up on television. He's running an ad, which is fairly interesting and fairly controversial, in which he's comparing the Democrats to clowns. Is that going to help him or hurt him?
We've seen worse. I think there's a ticket out of Mecklenburg and a ticket out of Union. That's what I think how that primary is going to work out.
Really?
For the runoff primary.
Dan McCready is generally thought to be a front runner in the overall election because of the fact he was in it before and ran very closely. Anybody disagree with that concept now?
Nope.
All right.
I think that's right.
Well, let's get down to the part of the show where we ask the panelists to tell us something we don't know. Becki Gray, we'll start with you.
Tom, we've talked in recent weeks about Medicaid expansion, health care. This is something the General Assembly is going to continue to grapple with, the whole question of the state health plan. This is going to be the real discussion for this session.
John Hood.
High Point University had a new poll out. Donald Trump's in the low 40s. His disapprovals are in the low 50s. That is exactly where it was a year ago. So there's very little change.
Chris Fitzsimon.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I think this is one of the most interesting political climates we've seen in a long time. I go back to something I said a long time ago. Greg Murphy, who's running a state senator or state representative who's running for Congress, is in the middle sort of the non-Medicaid plan that was introduced. I think that will be a big issue in this primary.
Interesting. Howard Lee, tell us something we don't know.
I'm concerned that we are, in our educational system, are not putting enough emphasis on civic education, and I think you've heard me say this before. I'm still singing that same song. But I'm also finding that younger people have a great interest in wanting to know more about our government and how they can function in it.
The controversy there is whose version of civics are you talking about? How do you go about establishing that?
Well, I think civics is civics.
It should be the NC Spin version.
The NC Spin version. Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day to stay informed all during the week. Sign up for our free weekly email newsletter. Give your feedback and read my weekly column. Be sure to visit our newly revamped website at ncspin.com or on NC Spin at Facebook, and let us know what you think, by the way. Join us next week when we'll have more balanced debate for the Old North State. Until then, stay informed, watch out for the spin, don't forget to hide the eggs, and happy Easter.
Partners for Innovation in Healthcare. We're supporting common sense solutions for North Carolina's healthcare delivery system, promoting access, affordability, quality care, and innovation. Visit us on the web at pihc.info.
From treating the newest member of your family to helping a loved one make end-of-life decisions, your family physician is with you every step, for every stage of life, for every member of your family. Despite a healthcare landscape fraught with potential landmines, family physicians across North Carolina are providing you a lifetime of committed, dependable medical care. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
Life's busy, but you're in control. As an electric cooperative member, you have access to lots of tools to help manage your home energy use and budget, so you can focus on what's most important.
More than 2 million North Carolinians, including 435,000 children, live in areas where they can't buy healthy food. We can do better than this. Learn how we can improve access to healthy food at ncallianceforhealth.org.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
North Carolina Channel is made possible by the financial contributions of viewers like you who support the UNC TV network.